Hello and welcome. Under Maryland State Law House Bill 270, enacted in 2017, titled Testing for Lead in Drinking Water, Public and Non-Public Schools, schools are required to periodically test the water from their drinking water outlets for lead. In this video, we will be discussing how to properly collect drinking water samples from your school's outlets for lead. Before beginning sampling, you will need to create a sampling plan. To do this, first obtain or make a floor plan of your school. Please see Maryland Department of the Environment's video on creating a floor plan on our website and linked in the video description below. You will need to determine a date to perform the sample collection. Sampling must be performed while school is in session during the regular school year. However, if your school has regular daily activities during summer which result in normal water use patterns, sampling can be performed at that time. If your school plans to test during the summer, please contact MDE prior to any sampling. It is important to avoid collecting samples after an extended vacancy of the school building, such as summer breaks, holidays, weekends, or vacations, because the water will have remained stagnant for too long and will not be representative of water use patterns during the normal school session. Next, MDE suggests that you do a walkthrough of the school building to identify all drinking water outlets or fixtures which will need to be sampled. This includes all drinking water outlets that are regularly used by students and/or staff for drinking, food prep, cooking, or making drinks, and that are connected to piped water. The list of outlets shown here are examples of some of the outlets you may find at your school. These outlets may include drinking water fountains, bottle filler stations, ice and hot drink machines, and sinks. With that said, there are some outlets which you do not have to test. These include toilet bowls, eye wash stations, shower heads, and outlets not connected to piped water, such as a 5-gallon cooler. In addition, outlets that are out of service or inaccessible do not need to be tested until there are plans to return them to service. At the time of your school's routine or standard testing, please make note of any out of service or inaccessible outlets in your submitted documentation to MDE. Non-consumption outlets that have appropriate permanent signage indicating that the water is not used for drinking or is for hand washing only also do not need to be tested. Some examples of signage you may post at non-consumption outlets are shown here. For more information regarding signage protocol, please see MDE's Rules and Example Signage for Outlets guidance document on our website and linked in the description below. Unique outlet identification codes will need to be created and assigned to each outlet prior to sampling and should be indicated on the floor plan. This can be just a number, or it can be a combination of letters and numbers. Once an outlet is assigned an outlet ID code, this code should not change for that particular outlet for all subsequent rounds of testing. The outlet ID codes will be used for multiple forms such as the floor plan and the Laboratory Results Reporting Form, or EDD. The school needs to ensure that the drinking water samples are analyzed by a laboratory that is certified by the state for lead analysis in drinking water. The list of Maryland State certified laboratories can be found on our website or see the link in the description below. Next, we will discuss procedures regarding the chain of custody, sample bottles, and sample bottle labels. A chain of custody form, typically provided by the lab, should be used to record necessary information during sample collection. Your school's name and address should be written on the chain of custody. For each sample, this information should include the outlet ID codes, laboratory bottle number, sample collection event name, the date and time of sample collection, the type of sample collection, the name of the sample collector, and a description of the outlet location. If a chain of custody form is not provided, you may use page 2 of the sample collection form or create your own form as long as it contains all of the necessary information. The lab will typically provide sample bottles and bottle labels. However, you do have the option to procure your own bottles from an outside source. Please ensure that the bottles are 250 milliliter pre-cleaned, high-density polyethylene, wide-mouth, single-use, labeled bottles. It may be a good idea to request a few extra bottles from the lab in case of a sampling error, bottle contamination, or if you would like to collect additional samples. If the lab does not provide labels, you may also write on the bottles directly with a waterproof pen. The minimum information on the sample bottles should include the unique outlet ID, outlet location, date and time of sample collection, the school name, the sample collector's name or initials, and the type of analysis to be performed by the lab, which in this case will always be lead. When contacting the laboratory for sample bottles, MDE recommends requesting bottles that have not been pre-acidified. Bottles that are pre-acidified contain a preservative such as nitric acid. If you inadvertently receive a sample bottle with preservative, it is recommended you contact the lab to request new bottles without preservative. If you choose to proceed with sample collection using the pre-acidified bottles, please do so with caution, as nitric acid can burn if it touches skin or clothing. You should wear appropriate personal protective equipment, also referred to as PPE, such as non-latex or nitrile gloves and safety glasses. In order to prevent contamination of the collected samples, do not touch the inside of the bottle or cap, do not remove the cap before you are ready to collect the sample, and do not rinse the bottle prior to sampling. Contamination of the samples may skew lead testing results. If a bottle is contaminated, discard the bottle and the sample if it is already collected. There are two main types of sample collection methods: first draw samples and flush samples. A first draw sample is a sample you collect as soon as the outlet is turned on after a period of stagnation. The purpose of this sample is to determine if an outlet is contributing lead to the drinking water. This can also help determine how much lead someone may be exposed to if they were the first person in the building to take a drink after the water had been stagnant for an extended period of time. The stagnation period for lead testing under the state law is 8 to 18 hours. A flush sample is collected after running the water for a minimum of 30 seconds or until the water temperature changes. Flush samples represent water use conditions throughout the school day and better reflect actual daily exposure. A flush sample may help schools to determine if an outlet is showing elevated lead levels because of an issue with the outlet itself, or if it is an issue in the plumbing. A flush sample may also help inform you of the best course of action for remediation for an outlet. When collecting first draw samples, there are a few important factors to consider. Before collecting any first draw samples, the water must be stagnant in the entire building for a period between 8 and 18 hours. In order to best achieve this, it is suggested to allow the water to stagnate overnight and collect the samples first thing in the morning before any students, faculty, staff, or other personnel arrive. In order for MDE to confirm that the water has been stagnant for at least 8 hours, the date and time the water was last used, and the date and time of sample collection is required to be entered on the EDD. The date and time the water was last used should also be recorded on the chain of custody and/or on page 2 of the sample collection form. All first draw samples must be collected in the building before any flush sample is collected. Once a flush sample is collected, no first draw samples may be collected anywhere in the building that day. If a first draw sample is collected after a flush sample, it will be rendered invalid. Running an outlet long enough to collect a flush sample anywhere in a building has the potential to pull water through the pipes throughout the entire building, making any subsequent sample from that building unstagnated and therefore unacceptable as a first draw sample. Only use cold water when collecting samples. Hot water from the tap is not considered potable water, and the increase of temperature could affect the lead level, which could skew lead analysis results. If your school has auto sensors on any outlets, please contact MDE regarding your sampling options. If an outlet has an aerator, do not remove it prior to sampling. It is recommended that aerators be cleaned out regularly, for example, at least every 6 months. However, the aerator should not be cleaned out prior to or during sample collection because doing so can mask added lead contribution at the tap. Another important factor is whether or not the outlet has a filter. If an outlet has a filter, collect it without the filter if possible in order to obtain a proper baseline first draw sample. However, there are a few caveats to this rule. One is if the filter was added to the outlet to remediate a past elevated lead result. Another is if the filter cannot be removed or bypassed without significantly modifying or damaging the outlet or the plumbing, such as in a bottle filler station. Please follow the flow chart shown here to determine the best course of action for each scenario. This flow chart can also be found on our website and is linked in the description below. If you can remove the filter and would like to collect 2 samples from an outlet, one with the filter in place, also referred to as post-filter or filtered sample, and one without a filter in place, also referred to as pre-filter or unfiltered sample, please collect the samples on different days. Indicate clearly on the EDD which sample is collected without the filter and which sample is collected with the filter. There are other situations which may require the collection of samples on different days. First is if a chiller serves multiple drinking water fountains, and second, if more than one outlet or fixture is served by one water inlet, also referred to as a shared inlet. If your school has drinking water fountains with a shared chiller, or your school has outlets which have a shared inlet, outlets must be sampled at least 8 hours apart. 3 common examples of outlets with possible shared inlets include, but are not limited to, drinking water fountain and bottle filler combination units, 2 or more fountains adjacent to one another, and combination drinking water fountains and sinks. It is generally safe to assume that samples will need to be collected on more than one day. Most schools will need to sample on multiple days to account for shared inlets and drinking water fountains which share a chiller. If you are unsure whether 2 or more outlets share an inlet, or if drinking water fountains share a chiller, it may be best to sample the outlets on different days to err on the side of caution and to avoid being asked by MDE to resample. However, if you are 100% sure that the outlets do not share an inlet, you can sample on the same day, but you will be asked to provide a written statement confirming that these outlets do not share an inlet. In the case of bottle, filler, and drinking water fountain combination units, you will be asked to provide documentation demonstrating that these outlets do not share an inlet. It is important to note that combination units often share a chiller as well. Now that we have discussed all the necessary components to consider when creating a sampling plan and how to prepare for sampling, you will need to determine who is going to collect the samples. For this, you have a few options. You can choose to collect the samples yourself, or you may hire an outside contractor. This can be someone from the contracted lab or from an outside source. The night before a scheduled sampling event, take note of the date and time the water was last used. It is highly recommended that this information is included on the chain of custody form and again is required to be entered on the EDD. Also, do a walkthrough of the entire school to ensure that all outlets, including those not being tested, are turned off and no water is running, including any drips or leaks. If there are any leaks at an outlet that are steady, the entire sampling of the building should be rescheduled until the outlet can be fixed. On the day of sampling, do a walkthrough again before collecting any samples to verify that the water has remained stagnant for a minimum of 8 hours and to ensure that there was no water running overnight. If any steady leaks are found at any of the outlets, the sampling event should be rescheduled to a later date. However, if you observe an outlet which has a slow drip, MDE recommends not sampling that particular outlet until it is fixed. The sampling of other outlets without any leaks or drips can proceed. When beginning sampling, make sure you have a sufficient number of 250 milliliter sampling bottles, a waterproof pen, bottle labels if provided by the lab, and a chain of custody form or page 2 of the sample collection form. When you are ready to collect the sample, open the bottle carefully. To collect first draw samples, gently turn on the cold water tap or spigot directly into the bottle and fill the bottle to the neck. There may be a line marked at 250 milliliters on your bottles. Do not allow the tap to flow prior to sample collection. Do not allow the bottle to overfill. If it does, throw out the sample and recollect at a later date. Please remember, if 2 or more outlets share an inlet or chiller, or you suspect that they may share an inlet or chiller, do not sample them on the same day. Now that we've discussed first draw sample collection, let's discuss what needs to be considered when submitting samples to the laboratory. Once your school has completed sample collection, it is recommended that samples are submitted to the lab as soon as possible. Samples must be received by the lab in sufficient time to ensure that the lab can preserve the samples within 14 days of the sample collection. Samples must be analyzed by the lab within 6 months of the date of preservation. It is not necessary for the samples to be refrigerated or packed in ice for shipment or transport to the laboratory. There are a few types of outlets which require a slightly different sampling technique. These include ice machines, coffee machines, and kitchen kettles. For ice machines, fill the 250 milliliter bottle with ice using a plastic scoop or with your hand while wearing nitrile or non-latex gloves and tightly cap the sample. Then follow the same labeling, documentation, and submission procedure as outlined previously for the first draw sample collection. For kitchen kettles and coffee machines, please see the guidance documentation on MDE's webpage for additional information. Collecting a flush sample is similar to collecting a first draw sample. However, there are a few key differences. Collecting flush samples is required if laboratory results from the first draw samples come back showing elevated lead levels at an outlet. Elevated lead levels are considered to be 5.5 parts per billion or above, or 5.5 micrograms per liter or above. Flush samples must be collected within 5 school days after the school receives a laboratory analysis report with an elevated lead result. Flush samples do not require prior stagnation. When collecting the sample, let the water run for at least 30 seconds or until the water temperature changes. Then, follow the same procedure as the first draw sample collection. For ice machines, disconnect the ice machine and collect the flush sample from the nearest outlet. Flush samples can be collected from outlets with shared inlets on the same day. Other than these few differences, the necessary documentation and laboratory submission process is the same for flush samples and for first draw samples. With that said, the outlet ID code should be the same as the corresponding first draw sample because it came from the same outlet. However, the laboratory sample ID number and/or bottle number will be different. Flush samples are also recommended at critical outlets. Critical outlets are outlets that are essential to the daily function of the school, such as kitchen sinks used for cooking and food preparation, and are only accessible to school staff. MDE recommends that schools collect flush samples at critical outlets on the same day as the first draw samples, but only after all first draw samples from all the outlets in the building have been collected. If the result of a flush sample from a critical outlet shows a non-elevated level of lead after a first draw sample which shows an elevated level of lead, MDE allows a temporary mitigation plan of flushing the outlet prior to each use to reduce lead levels until a permanent solution, such as a fixture replacement, is implemented. Signage must be posted at the outlet clearly stating that flushing for a minimum of 30 seconds is required prior to each use. Please see MDE's Rules and Example Signage for Outlets guidance document on our website and linked in the description below. Thank you for viewing this video. To see the directions in written form with step-by-step instructions, please refer to MDE's Sample Collection Instructions document and MDE's Testing Requirements and Related Documents guidance document. Both documents can be found linked in the video description below and on our website. To go back and review certain sections of this video, please see the time codes in the video description below. For more information, please visit our website linked in the video description below or contact us at reporting.leadschoolwater@maryland.gov. Thank you.